Welcome one and all to the Mudai Manga Book Club podcast. Today is March 5th, 2025, episode 7. You get a curse, and you get a curse. My name is Louis, and I'll be your guide to the world of curses, and I am joined with my co-host.
Think positive. Fill your soul with positive energy, and use that positivity to crush your enemies into a fine paste.
Tom.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the show. Hope you're all having a good one.
So for anyone who hasn't listened before, first thing we're going to do is talk about some things we've been listening to, reading, enjoying, but then we're going to cover two topics today. First is going to be what makes the moment when a story gets good. Ponder that, if you will. And the other thing we're going to talk about is Jujutsu Kaisen. We're going to look into the Fearsome Womb arc, which is chapters 1 through 18, or the first two books, roughly.
So what have you been up to?
What have I been up to is not a lot.
Oh.
The only thing I've actually read recently, it's just been crazy week, is Mushoku Tensei Volume 4, the light novel. So it's good. I like it. It's continuing the story. It's one of those where there's a story arc, but it's very subtle. It's one of those, the story just goes, and it's not stopping. So this is much more of a, we're just going to keep continuing the story of traveling home. So there's traveling, you meet some more cultures, more trials and tribulations. You have the three main characters right now, and one of them is a Superd, which is hated demon race in the country. So they kind of have to be a little on the sly about who he is. And they're going from the demon continent to the Milas continent, which is more of a holy city, or not holy city, like a more religious country where they don't like demons. So him going from the demon continent to a religious country is not the easiest thing in the world. So it's trying to figure out how they're going to do that. And then you also learn more about some of the bigger powers on the demon continent. You meet, I guess you'd call it a mortal demon who just shows up as time goes on, gets defeated, but she is the bearer of demon eyes. So the demon eyes are like, I think the Sharingan of Naruto, where they can give you powers.
Okay.
But they're very subtle powers. Like one lets you X-ray vision. One lets you absorb magic. One lets you see farther. Things like that.
Those first two don't sound very subtle.
Well, it's one of those, they're very one-trick pony.
Oh, okay.
So
gotcha.
You get that, and that's all it does. You can see farther. So your one eye is now permanently able to see farther.
Ah. Okay.
Yeah. So one of the ones that Rudius picks is the ability to see into the future. But it's the more energy you put into it, the farther you can see. But once you start going even farther, your vision starts to see, okay, well, if I flip this coin, it flips. But then I try to catch it, and it bounces off my hand in a million different ways if I see too far into the future, just because there's so many probabilities.
Right.
So it's the dialing in, okay, how far into the future where I can react to it, but not too far into the future where there's too many things for me to react to, and I have to guess what's going to happen.
Gotcha.
So that's what he chooses. There's a big chunk of him trying to learn how to use it, and its benefits, but also its drawbacks, and it shows you how good he is at using magic, but also he's still not sure what's going on in the world. There's so much that he doesn't know, just because it's a huge continent. I think in this book he's 11. In this world he's 40 something now.
Yeah, it's the isekai where you're reborn as an infant.
So he was reborn as an infant.
Yeah.
You learn later, not everyone who was in the original accident is reborn as an infant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that comes up later. So if you watch the show, you realize that there's someone else in the world who wasn't reborn as an infant, but they don't age. So they're still the same 17-year-old they were when they got hit by the bus.
I see.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
But this book is still very much, we're still traveling.
Cool.
We're still going. But it's interesting. There's a lot more world building. This is a big world building one.
Okay.
It's a light novel thing where the story just goes, and you just find good places to start and end. It's good.
Yeah, sounds like fun.
But that's pretty much the only thing I got up to this week.
Oh.
So what have you been up to?
So I didn't think I had read a lot, and then I wrote it down, and there's 15 books here. So, first of all, to follow up from last week, yes, immediately after the episode finished, I sat down and read the entirety of Peddler in Another World, Volume 9. It's good. I'm not going to talk about any of it in detail because it's a second part of a two-parter and pretty far into the story, and there's kind of a lot of things in it that are spoilers to earlier books. It's not everything is tied back to what's happened, but, oh, this character exists. Like, well, they were in book 4, and you don't really know what happens to them in book 4. So finding out they're there in book 9 would sort of give stuff away. It's good. Peddler goes through cycles. Each book is like, oh, this is a dramatic book. Oh, this is a sad book. Oh, this is a silly book.
Okay.
8 and 9 have been very dramatic, adventure-y type stories.
Okay.
Not so much like an actual like traveling adventure, but stuff's happening, and then there's a bad guy, and then this happens, and then that happens. Nothing super outrageous or original, but a lot of fun. It is only a 2-parter. Thank God. I would have gone crazy if it was a 3-parter.
I haven't seen many 3-parter light novels.
Yeah, I feel like the conclusion comes pretty suddenly towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things are there, and basically, instead of solving one problem and then solving the next problem and then solving the last problem, 2 of the 3 problems just show up in the same spot at the same time, and they solve both of them at once. And then the third problem is just, yeah, we're going to deal with this in another book. It wasn't that important anyway. But it's good. It's a lot of fun. I want to see what happens next before I decide how I feel about it, because book 8 and 9 have the first actual like romantic subplot in the story, but I don't know if it's real, which I can't explain.
It's a dream, or?
No, so the plot of 8 starts with one of the characters asks Shiro to be her fake fiance.
Okay.
But it would be spoilers also to say who it is and like what happens from it. But like there's an actual like romantic subplot of the 2 of them where it's like, oh, they might actually like each other's company, which is an entire first for this series of 9 books. Shiro actually having romantic feelings for another living creature. He likes everybody. He's nice to everybody. But it's just like, yep, you're my friend.
Okay.
And it's a big part of the story. So it's sort of like, this is pretty cool. I hope this isn't immediately swept under the rug and forgotten about in the next book. After that was Frontier Lord number 7 just came out. The light novel. Very good. It focuses on them visiting the neighboring kingdom run by Eldon, the half-elephantkin.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of small, minor plot hooks that are probably going to come up later, and it's a lot of setup, but it's an interesting little story. You get to see the characters in a different situation because they're mostly outside of the grasslands, and they're mostly trying to act like what nobles would act like. It's fun. It's entertaining. I definitely enjoyed it. The next, I got the first 2 volumes of the manga, How a Realist Hero Rebuilt the Kingdom. It was one of my favorite light novels. I've been reading it for years now. Book 19's finally coming up. So freaking excited.
Did you say 19?
Book 19 of the light novels is coming out. Yes.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. I had never read the manga, picked it up, and I read the first 2. Then I bought the next 9, and then I read them all. So I read books 1 to 11. It's good. I have thoughts. I have a lot of things to say on it because it's one of my favorite series, and there's a lot of things I like about it. And the manga doesn't change things, but because it's doing it in a different way, and there's things that I don't like about it, but I understand why they did it. But knowing what happens in the novel, it's like, I don't know if this is the right thing to have done, but I can't explain that really quickly. What I will say, the art is absolutely gorgeous.
Okay.
It's different. It's not really beautifully done art, but it's a very distinct style.
Okay.
A little more realistic proportions, a little bit more European American comic style of just like people's faces and things. They're not as exaggerated as you would expect from this, and there's a lot more of like filigree and detail on different things.
Interesting.
It just looks really pretty when you see the style. It's like, this is not anything else I've ever seen, and that's a big part of what makes the manga really good. The art's great, even if it's not perfectly done. And even if it's not altogether 100% beautiful, and even if it's not telling the story, I think, in the best way, it's still doing it all really good. And it gives you something that's different from the novels that's really interesting. Because one of the weakest things of how Realist Hero Built the Kingdom, the little insert art is not that good. It's okay. The covers are great. The color pictures are pretty good. The insert pictures are mostly fine, but a couple of them are kind of like, yeah, I'm just not going to look at this anymore.
Huh. Okay.
To me, it's of the novels, is probably one of its weakest things. It's not bad, but it's not always good.
Interesting. Okay.
If you like that story, the manga's really good. Overall, it's a good retelling. I love the story, so I think it's great. And then finally, the last two are Dungeon Friends Forever. So a human adventurer and a dragon, who's also a girl,
Of course.
were childhood friends.
Okay.
Now, the dragon is the dungeon boss of a dungeon,
Okay.
and the boy is an adventurer.
Okay.
And the only time the boy can see his childhood friend is if he goes through the entire dungeon and gets to the bottom floor.
Okay.
And this is a gag romance manga.
Yep. I could see that.
The first page of it is, wow, you know what's fantasy? Adventurers. That's a crazy fantasy of people going out and conquering monsters and saving the day and doing things. You know what else is fantasy? Childhood friends. That's the thing. Nothing about this is taken seriously. It's very dumb. It's very funny. It's just like a goofy little fun thing to read. And the first book is great. The boy is idiotically powerful and absolutely normal looking. And his entire thing is he has no technique. He just uses brute strength.
Okay.
Like, there's this crazy locked door. He just runs into it and it explodes.
Yeah.
And all of the dragon, she has a whole group of her elite monsters. And they're all constantly spying on the two of them, like hoping that the two of them get together. So every scene of the two characters like sitting together, like playing a board game, because that's what they'll do. He'll come down, run through 100 floors of the dungeon, beat everyone up, and then play a board game. But all the boss monsters are there in the corner, like peeking around the door, like, hey, do you think we should like encourage them to like push the relationship? No, it's too cute like this. Stop it. It's a great little fun, goofy, lighthearted read. And then last thing I read this week, which I wasn't sure I would finish in time, but I just finished before the show, was Cooking with Wild Game.
Yeah, this sounds familiar.
Because we can't have a show about Japanese manga and novels without talking about cooking at least once. Pretty standard isekai. Picked it up and I just finally finished it after how many years. I went back and started from the beginning. Japanese teenager who works for his father's restaurant ends up possibly dying in a fire, trying to save his father's knife from the restaurant when it was being burned down, and ends up waking up in another world in the middle of a forest where it's a people that lives along the forest edge and hunts the giant, crazy, super powerful boars who live nearby, who only live nearby because the monsters in the mountains push them out of the mountains, because the monsters in the mountains are that much crazier. And so the people there just hunt them, and their food tastes awful.
Of course.
And so he, being a completely weak and useless guy who is saved by the female lead, Aifa, who hasn't been exiled from her people, but basically for reasons and things that have happened, nobody wants to associate with her.
Okay.
She ends up saving him, and they're entirely a people that lives where you eat to live, and that's it. It doesn't matter how awful the food tastes. If you don't eat, you die, so you have to eat to live. And the entire first book is him trying to figure out how to make the food better, and a few things that happen along the way. And I have no idea how it goes 27 books, because there's 27 books of it in English. But it's an interesting story, and it's very, very grounded. He has no special abilities. There hasn't been any magic. There hasn't been anything like that. It still manages to be this compelling little narrative.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
All about cooking.
It sounds familiar, but yeah, I don't think I've read it.
It's one of the early big light novels that's come to the US.
Okay.
So if you've ever looked around, hey, can I buy light novels here websites, it's come up. It's another one that was brought over by J Novel Club, and it started coming out in English in like 2019.
Okay.
you've probably seen it.
Yeah, probably.
It's good. It's entertaining. It's very down to earth and human.
Mm-hmm.
It makes more sense for half of it to be a cooking show.
Gotcha. Are there a lot of them?
Of that series, yeah, there's 27 novels.
Wow. Okay.
In English. I have no
English.
idea how many are in Japanese. I think it might still be going, so they might be up to 30 or something now. There's at least 27.
Okay. Lot to go.
I think the manga of it also exists.
Cool. I'll check it out.
So for our small topic today, we're going to take a look at something that's been rumbling around in my head for the last month and a half. We'll get to all the details on that in a moment. A little bit of background on myself. I was an English lit major, so my brain is built to sit and think way too much about stories. And one of the things that I had gotten stuck on was specifically Don't Toy With Me, Miss Nagatoro, which I think I've brought up in every episode since I started reading it. And the thing that got stuck with me is the idea that there's a point in a story where you get to, and all of a sudden it becomes really good. And I feel like that's a thing that we always talk about with a lot of stories where, oh, this series, like, yeah, it's all right. And then, like, book 3, it's going to get really cool. Or, oh, once you get to this arc, that's when the story gets crazy. I feel like, especially with Japanese manga and light novels and other Japanese media, partially because the series are so long, but also because the series are very single direction. You start at the beginning and you go forward. There tends to always be these moments where everybody says the story just suddenly gets really good. Mm-hmm. And I've been thinking about that and trying to understand and explain it. And that's led me to this point, which is what we're going to talk about today. Don't know what to call it, so I came up with the dumbest name, which is the critical point.
And just to be clear, this is different from a climax of a story.
Yes, this is not about the traditional narrative. This is not even about the narrative itself. Mm-hmm. This is a meta topic about the point in a story when, and it doesn't have to be an exact moment. It's not like, oh, sentence 5 on page 23, specifically as it trails into the next like, no, it doesn't have to be that specific. A moment in the story or a part of a story, when you're reading it, the story goes from being good to great, or from great to exceptional, or that moment when the story suddenly clicks, and not that the narrative moves forward, but you as the reader or consumer of the story, your opinion of the story suddenly goes up because it's better. Okay. It doesn't have to be something for everyone. It can literally just be for you. But I feel like with a lot of stories, and correct me if I'm the only one who's ever thought that, but there are lots of stories where we talk about, oh, once you get to this part of it, you'll understand why it's good. Or if you get to that part and you still don't like it, yeah, you're not going to like it at all.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. There's plenty of stories where it's like, it starts off okay, but once they get the feel for how they want the story to progress, or they get to this very cool story idea that just makes it go, oh, yeah, this is what they were trying to convey before.
Yeah.
And they were only able to do that once they got to here. And it's like, oh, now all that other stuff that happened before makes more sense. Mm-hmm. And then we can just take it up to another level going forward. Because you have all that groundwork done, and now it just gets better. But as you say, that's kind of subjective for people, because there will be people like, yeah, I got to there, and it's still not for me, so I just stopped.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to be something that everyone agrees on. But as you said, and I think we both think, and I think everyone listening to this will think, we all have these stories where everybody talks about these moments as if everyone feels that way. And I think that's something that's also really weird, is it's everyone will be reading the story, and enough people to actually make this become a rumor read this part and go, you know, I wasn't like so happy with the story as much as I am now, but when that thing happened, that's when I really liked it. And so that's what I want to try and encapsulate here and sort of take apart not so much to explain why it happens, because God knows, like, I can barely explain what it is. I want to take that moment and put it in front of everybody and be like, this is the thing that we're talking about. This is weird and interesting. Let's think about it and then hopefully understand it a little bit better than we have before.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think before I get into some of my examples and stuff, one thing I do want to say, though, is there's some other stuff that we kind of have to pay attention to and remember. This is my literary brain coming in and being like, okay, what is it not? And it's not the climax of the story. It's not the narrative moving forward. It's not the actual events of the story. This is something that is a meta feeling about the story. And the only way that we can really talk about that in the way we're going to have to, we got to kind of assume that the story isn't getting better as it's going along. The author and the artist are not getting more talented as time goes on. We have to sort of assume the story stays at an even level, which of course it doesn't. Obviously, the authors usually, not always, sometimes they get worse, but usually they get better with time. Same with the artist, same with everybody. As they do it more, they get better. The other thing I think, though, that defines this, it is not a steady increase. It is a sizable jump. A story that we may or may not be talking about in a few minutes, called Jujutsu Kaisen. I like it better than when I started, but I have not had a moment where it went from, oh, this is good, to, wow, this is great. I think for me, it's crossed from okay to good, but it was, each chapter was a tiny bit higher, and each one slowly added up to get me up there. Whereas other stories, it'll be like, oh, this is pretty good, to next chapter, this is amazing, and I'm going to buy the entire rest of the series right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and every story is going to be different. It's one of those, just what hooks you about that story is either going to happen gradually, just based on how the narrative is structured, or it's going to be, we're just going to flip the script right at the beginning, and it's like, oh, I've never read this before. So that hooks you. But there could be plenty of times when, yeah, that hook didn't work for me. That character doesn't work, or something like that. It's like, okay, well, you win some, you lose some, but...
Yeah. I think the other thing that we have to sort of, like, to make the way I'm talking about it make more sense, we also have to, like, take two things that seem really obvious for this and just say, like, we're not talking about those. Which is, we're not talking about a single book.
No.
If it's a single novel, no. If it's a single comic book or something like that, that's not going to work because it's one book. It needs to be a series. It needs to go on for some length of time for you to start reading it, have an opinion that it's, I don't know, 73 out of 100, and then suddenly you get to this certain point and now it's 85 out of 100.
Right.
So there has to be a sizable length, and it also can't be in the very beginning. I think that Dandadan is amazing from chapter 1.
Yes.
I believe you agree with this. I think a lot of people agree with this.
Yes.
You could call that a critical point, because before then, I had no opinion whatsoever. And then I read the first chapter, and I'm like, I'm buying all of this.
I think that's...
But I feel like that's
exception.
Cheating.
That's not
it's an exception too, but at the same time, for most of these, there's no set point when this happens. So if you had just said like, oh, well, it happens on chapter 7, it's like, well, that's the exception. Plenty of them happen on chapter 8. Plenty of them happen on book 3.
Or even later, yeah.
But I think it being in the very beginning, or even the first book, you kind of just have to say like, okay, maybe that's true. Maybe that fits all of our criteria here, but we're going to ignore those. Because that's not because they're not this, but it's harder to differentiate what's the beginning of the story grabbing you and what's something changing as the story goes along that suddenly elevates it. And I think that'll make more sense with some of our examples coming up. But to me, if it's, I read the first book and at some point in the first book, I'm like, yep, this is amazing. I'm going to get it. I'm going to, not just I like it, not just I want to read the next one, but I want to read all of them now. That's kind of too condensed to say, is it just the story is so good that I like it from the beginning, or it was okay and then it got great? Because in that very beginning, there's so much happening all at once. It's kind of hard to get a sense for your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
The examples I want to talk about is you have enough time to have an opinion and then have it upended further along.
Yeah.
So, and just to give it a name, I don't like the name, but I had to call it something, and I'm just calling it the critical point.
Yep.
This point where the story massively jumps upward in quality.
Okay.
And every example that I've been able to come across, I don't know if this is true for everything, but every one that I've seen is it's always been about taking, as you had said as well, something in the narrative or the story or the characters going from, okay, yeah, they've been trying to do this, and then, oh, wow, now I get it. It always feels like something's expanding. Everything that had been set up so far was just sort of, yeah, this works, and then at least the feeling I always get from them is, oh, everything opens up. Oh, now there's all these new things I can think about, all these new things they're going to talk about, all these new things that are going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the types and the examples, which, no, really, I'm going to get to that right now. Just hang on. That's where the ideas for these come from. I don't know if this is all of them. I don't like the last one, which you'll understand when I say it, because it's kind of a cop-out. But that's where I got the terms for what I'm going to use. I don't know if these are all correct, but I wanted to use them. First one is also the only one that I can think of an example that's not from Japanese manga and anime, and the only one that I also know definitely happened. Okay. So the first type is expanding characters. You have a story, and a new character comes in, and all of a sudden, everybody just gels with the story. The pinnacle example, the one that I can actually point to, and there was actual existing reporting on this being a thing, the TV show Happy Days. The Fonz was meant to be a gag character in one episode. In like episode 6, and he was so incredibly popular, he became a main character of the series. I think it was like episode 5 or 6 he shows up. And good on the people who created the show for realizing this, making him part of the show, and bringing him in. But if you know anything about Happy Days, you know about the cool kid, the Fonz. He's like one of the most iconic characters of the show. He was meant to be a minor joke character in one episode. But the moment he came in, that combined with the other main characters just made everybody go, oh, I get it. Now I think it's funny. Now I'm really enjoying it. This is the thing that the story needed. So sometimes you have this narrative, you have this thing going on, and you bring in a new character, and all of a sudden now it really works. One of my favorite series, the best one I could think of, because I don't think this is always the easiest thing or the easiest thing to point to, Ranma 1/2. I think of the characters Ryoga and Shampoo, the two like big battle characters. Who Ryoga was, when he first came in, like he ended up becoming a joke for how weak he was in some things. But he was never totally weak. But his first appearance, it was almost an entire volume, the battle against him. And Shampoo was terrifyingly powerful when she showed up, and was also almost an entire book. But this comedy, fighting, weird romance story, with one of these two characters coming in, really changed things and became such a driving force of the plot for a short time that you finally go, oh, okay, it's not just every other chapter is some random person showing up that gets beat up and we save the day. It's here's a long, complicated series of battles and personal interrelationships and all the stuff that Ranma 1/2 is known for, and not, the humor and the martial arts and the boobs. The really hard-hitting narrative. That's what it's really about.
The real story.
Those are the characters that weren't just there for a chapter, and then the next chapter was somebody else. And then maybe they came back. But these were ones that were multi-chapter long stories that started really making the characters do something and the story be something more than just, okay, who's getting punched this week?
Yeah, this is a hard category, because it's one of those, well, they added this character, but was that always the plan? To just make them like a major plot point going forward? Because I'm looking through all of my stuff, it's like, okay, well, there's like L from Death Note. It's like,
Yeah.
if L wasn't there, this story would be so different. But
Yeah.
most likely, L was always planned to be there.
I want to say one thing. I don't think a critical point has to be unplanned. I think it can be planned. I don't think it's something you want to have happen. I think everybody wants a story to be amazing from the beginning.
True.
But what I think this is when the person writing the story decided to turn the switch on and make the story actually fun, and more of just, this is when we as readers get it or see the thing in this that we're going to be getting. And sometimes it's a new character. I think L is a great part of that, and he's absolutely essential to the story.
Yeah, that's probably my best example would be L from Death Note, because once he shows up, like, in person, and you see, it's like, okay, he's watching constantly, and you never know what he's thinking. It's like, okay, now it's actually a real cat and mouse kind of story. It's like, what's he going to do? What's am I going to do? How are we going to outdo each other while not breaking and figuring out how the other one's going to kill the other one? It's like, okay, this is when the story really gets good.
And the other thing that L does that's so important to that is L is completely different from Light.
Yeah.
He's always hunched over. He's always curled up. He's always, like, kind of talking things in sort of an odd way. He feels like the person who's not going to be the hero, but is absolutely just as brilliant as Light is. And it's the very obvious dichotomy that stories will use all the time. But L fills that void of an opponent who's very different but equally powerful.
Yeah, because there's plenty of stories where a new character gets added. It's like, okay, but the character itself is good and continues the story, but it's not one of those, this person defined the story going forward.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's most of the time.
Yeah.
To give a different example, to give a counterexample, Sanji from One Piece. I think Sanji's great. I think his story is fantastic. He's one of my favorite characters. The moment Sanji is introduced is not the moment when One Piece becomes great.
Yeah,
Personally, I think One Piece was already great. And I think Sanji's story is great. But I don't think a lot of people would pick that moment as that's when it was really good. Some people will. But I think a lot of One Piece characters, the story was already really good.
Okay.
You can add a new character and that can be a big, great plot point. But L is that incredibly defining part of the whole series.
Yeah. The only other one I can think of is Trigun with knives. Where
Yeah, I could see that.
it's one of those, once he's introduced, it's like, okay, now this whole cowboy, western, crazy stuff that's been going on has a reason and a focus. It's okay. His character is then what drives the story forward.
Yeah.
Because he's the one who's been pulling together everything from behind the scenes. He's just been this unknown person. Well, Vash knows who he is, but the reader doesn't.
Yeah.
But once Knives is introduced, like, okay, this is kind of a different story going forward, because before it was, just do one-off adventures, another bad guy of the week. But then Knives shows up and say, okay, now we have a story.
Yeah.
But the character one is tough, because that's very... Was it just the one character, or was it everything else going on at the same time when that character showed up?
I feel like this is going to also be the one where if you feel like that, it's going to be very personal.
I think so, yeah.
Because I think of the One Piece one, it's like, if Sanji is that guy for you for the story, you're going to be looking at me like, what are you talking about? He's clearly the greatest thing that ever, like, that was the moment. Even with Ranma 1/2, like, I love that series, and it's like, it's kind of when Shampoo showed up, but it was kind of when Ryoga showed up. Like, they both sort of have it, like, because my favorite characters just show up until, like, book 9. I don't really feel comfortable saying, like, oh, this was when the story got good, because I obviously read a ton of it up until that point and enjoyed the hell out of it. Otherwise, I would have just picked them, and this would have been so much simpler. But I feel like a lot of times with characters, it's either like L, where it's the entire narrative comes down to this person, even though it's not the narrative that's changing, it's the character that's changing something. Or it's a character that finally brings that story over to you of like, okay, now I get it. Now I see how these are all fitting together.
Yeah. The only other one I actually thought of just now is Asuka from Neo Genesis Evangelion. When she shows up, it's the story, while still continues the same way, that dynamic with all the characters changes.
Yes.
Because you have Shinji, who's very shy. You have Rei, who's even more shy and odd
Very
compared
quiet.
to everyone else.
Doesn't feel shy so much as just very quiet.
Yeah, true.
She is, but she comes off as just quiet instead of just shy.
And then you have Asuka, who shows up as a complete opposite of everyone and just throws the dynamic out the window.
Yeah. No, I think that's another good point. That's another really good one. So that's the first one, characters.
What's the next
The second one, this one I think is probably the actual hardest one to say is actually a critical point, but it's probably the one that most people would think of first. And that is the narrative expanding. The actual story is changing and expanding and becoming something bigger, and more of what's happening gets exposed to the reader, and that makes people like, oh, okay, now I see it. And I think part of that is because that's just how narratives work.
Yes.
And so to me, like, a critical point is never necessarily a good thing. Like, it happens, and like, okay, it's better that it happens than it never happens, but that it being a thing isn't the sign of a good story. And I think a good narrative can be constantly expanding and growing. But sometimes that expansion is just the moment when you realize, oh, now I get this and now I enjoy this. And that's why I have a bunch of examples for it. To me, one of my favorites was the subjugation battle, more specifically the moment of cruelty from How a Realist Hero Rebuilt the Kingdom. It's the second half of book 2, but it's this huge battle in a war between countries that the entire first 2 books have been building up to, kind of, but the actual major battle you don't find out is going to happen until just before it happens. But you're seeing all the heroes who have been doing all these crazy things throughout the first 2 books leading up to something, and then turning all of their enemies on their heads to then go into this huge battle, and then actually into the moment of cruelty that comes up after it is just like, oh, I was thinking what's happening in front of me. And the narrative has been thinking what's happening in front of me, what's happening to my right, to my left, 20 yards ahead of me, 50 yards behind me, and 2 feet underground, turned counterclockwise 47 degrees and 16 meters forward. Oh, I gotta be watching everything.
Yeah.
And that's the moment that you see that all coming together in How a Realist Hero Rebuilt the Kingdom. A very different example that does the same sort of thing. Hardboiled Cop and Dolphin. It's kind of technically the end of the first book, but it's really the second book. When the first ocean criminals arrive and you see them, and you understand ocean criminals is not just pirates, but the exploding octopus. This octopus that turns into a person, but will knock parts of it off of him, that will then just explode like bombs.
Yep.
And you realize, oh, this isn't just a police drama where one person looks like a dolphin. This is complete batshit crazy insanity.
Yeah.
That's something where just you go, oh, okay, yeah, I get it now. Yeah, sure. Yes, I'm sold. Let's go. This is what I want.
Yeah, the one I can think of, or the first one I can think of, is when in Berserk, when the God Hand shows up during the sacrifice.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, you now have a 5th god, and demons just begin to roam the earth. Because at that point, like, because the way the Berserk works is, at the beginning, you're in the present, and then it's like, okay, you see he has the Dragon Slayer sword, and he's wearing the armor, and then it jumps to the past, and then for so long it's in the past. And then, because you're like, how did he become what he is now? And you're going on. And then it's the sacrifice God Hand scene, and it's like, oh, that's what happened. And it's like,
Yeah.
that's crazy. Because now you know why the whole world is overrun. Because until then, it's like, okay, demons existed, sort of, but there's very few. But then all of a sudden, this just changed the story completely. And it's that's where I think Berserk goes from good to amazing.
Yeah.
Because it just shows you the whole world can be instantly turned upside down because of one person's decision.
A similar example to that, and very similar to yours with L, to me, Death Note, it's not L showing up. It's that scene, again, it's still in the first book, so it kind of feels cheating to say it, and it's like chapter 4 or 5, but that moment when Light kills the guy on the TV and Ella's like, got you, you're in Tokyo.
Oh,
And
yes.
it's like, what? It's like, oh, well, I realized that before all the murders really started, there was one random death in Japan. So I realized you were in Japan, but it happened while it was being broadcast on TV. So I set it up so that I was going to broadcast the same message on each of the 47 prefectures in Japan and just wait for the person to die in it. And it died while they're in Tokyo. So I know you're in Tokyo.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, crap. Like, the
Yep.
tiniest, that's when you know, like, the tiniest detail that they can find, they're going to use. And it's like, okay, this is going to be a hardcore story.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is my moment, which is also when I was introduced, which works out pretty well. But that's like my moment of like, oh, now I get it. Now I know why I want to keep reading this.
Yeah. And then in Demon Slayer, there's a part where his actual name is Rengoku. He is the flame breathing Hashira, so he's like the flame master. Because before now, it's like you had seen them, but in this instance, he shows up to rescue everyone on a runaway train, and you just see how powerful he is. It's like, okay, this is the pinnacle, this is the best they can get, and then he's killed. Because the demons are that much more powerful. And it's like, before now, it's like, oh, well, the main character gets hurt and things like that, but he always survives. Like, okay, but he's still new.
Yeah.
And then, okay, the best of the best shows up, wipes the floor with everyone. It's like, okay, yeah, these guys are powerful, they're great. And then, boom, the best of the best on the demon side shows up. It's like, yeah, go stand over there, you're a little baby.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not as strong as you think they are. It's like, yeah, so okay. So then it's like, oh, yeah, these are just people. And you're fighting demons, and it's... Our main character is good, but he wasn't that good, but he still has to fight these people who are even stronger.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it's like, okay, now we're really an uphill battle. Because before it's like, okay, he kind of suffered through it, but he still won, but he's new. And now, yeah, you're still not that good compared to everyone else. And you have a long way to go. And this just kind of solidifies the story of you have to keep working. Because even the best don't always win.
Yeah. The last one that I could think of was from My Daughter Left the Nest and Became an S-Rank Adventurer. This is probably the latest one that we've talked about so far. It's in book 4, I think. But it's the banquet arc, which is the moment where the main character's daughter... it's a whole long plot, but this is the moment where the father's Belle's past and his daughter's life finally actually intersect, and his daughter meets one of his old adventuring companions, and like you don't know what's gonna happen, and then they meet, and his old adventuring companion is like, oh my god, all I've wanted to know was that Belle is okay. Let's go hang out with your dad. He sounds awesome. This is like one of my favorite people from before. And that's when you know that, okay, this story is now going hard into Belle's past and what's happened to all those people. It goes from not necessarily completely disconnected, but stuff is happening and the characters are dealing with the crisis in front of them, to here's the thread that we're going to follow through the rest of the series, which is what it does. The entire rest of the series, everything comes along this thread of Belle tracing back the people from his past and helping, dealing with, or getting involved with the things that have happened to them and the other people from his past, the consequences of all those actions now in the present day. And this is the first moment where you have that becoming a thing that you know is going to happen, instead of just... Because up until the moment where his daughter and the person at the banquet actually meet, it's just back and forth scenes between them, completely separate. You know the moment they show up, because the author has been hinting at it 100 times, that this is what they're going to talk about, but you don't know what's going to happen. And then it happens, and it immediately goes that way. And it's like, okay, that's where we're going. That's what we're going to make this story about. And it just sort of expands it in that you know what it's going to be, but it's also very clarifying of like, this is the story. This is where we're going. And it's not a simple story, but it's, okay, now I get what we're doing here. Now I get where we're going. Mm-hmm. And I'm in for it. I'm ready for this. Let's go.
And they don't have to be major story points, too. Well, they're major story points anyways, but you have, like in Bleach, once they go to Soul Society, it's like, okay, this is different now. Because before you're in present-day Japan, it's one of those, okay, this could theoretically be a lot of stories. But as soon as you go to Soul Society, it's like, okay, this is now its own story. This is its own thing. This is where we take just the whole crux of what's going on and take it in a new direction, from fighting the bad guy of the week or things like that. But now we're in a new world almost. We've been reborn into this Soul Society in various ways. Mm-hmm. But now it's, okay, this is a new direction that we're going to go going forward.
Yeah.
Whereas the beginning starts in now, and then we go, and then we're just going to go this way. And that's a really good turning point, because I think if it stayed in present-day Japan, it just did the story there,
it would never have been the same.
No, it would have felt too similar to other stories, and it just wouldn't have been able to expand as well as it could have without going to Soul Society.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's another expanding thing?
The third one, and the third, good one that we can actually discuss, is this one. I think is the one that will always be the critical point, is an expanding genre, where the story has been this kind of thing. And when I say genre, I don't mean just in the big top level things of romance, action, adventure, drama, but I mean incredibly niche genres even. I'll get to one of the ones I'm talking about this specifically in a moment, but when you have the story suddenly take on this new genre, it can make everything be recontextualized, which I think is one way that improves a story. Hint for the first example I'm about to talk about. But also it then opens up that narrative to this genre is also important, and it's what we're going to talk about. Nagatoro. This is the thing with Nagatoro. End of book 2. To me, it's the scene with when Senpai sits down at the lunch table with Nagatoro and her friends, and Nagatoro is constantly ribbing on Senpai. And then the moment one of her friends tries to join in and do the same thing, boom, immediately Nagatoro smacks her down. She's like, oh, I'm going to rub your greasy hair too. And she's grabs her by the hands no, you're not going to do that. It's what? I've never seen Nagatoro do this. Yeah, Senpai, you're a big stupid oaf. It's her friend's yeah, you're a big stupid oaf. What did you just say? Oh, she likes him. Because that's the thing with Nagatoro is the beginning is this bullying, goofy comedy. And then you realize Nagatoro likes Senpai, and very quickly Senpai likes Nagatoro. They're just idiotic teenagers who don't know how to talk about this, and it's a very awkward dynamic for it to be a thing. The beginning of book 3 has another moment like this, where they get caught in the rain, and Nagatoro's making fun of Senpai, and it's Senpai's oh, she's making fun of me because oh, Senpai, I'm so soaking wet, you're probably so perfect gonna look over at me. And it's I see why she's saying this, because she's actually wearing a bathing suit underneath. And it's well, I'm not gonna fall for it. And he turns around and sees her underwear, and it's oh crap, I'm sorry. Oh nope, I didn't do that. And the important thing is there's 3 or 4 panels where Nagatoro is shocked and embarrassed and oh, but tiniest fraction of happy, and then immediately goes oh, now I'm gonna be evil again because that's how I like to be. But there's that moment where you see her starting to be but he did actually like me, and the scene from there goes on with more of that when they end up going to her house. It's now not just a bullying story. It's now not just a comedy. It's a romance, and that changes everything. Because when it's just bullying, it's funny, but there's a part of you that's I don't really want to watch this. I'm kind of I'm not the kind of person who just wants to watch someone get bullied the whole time. I'm a better, more upstanding member of society who definitely doesn't watch porn. What are you talking about? And then when the moment it's romance, it's oh, okay, now I don't care. Clearly they're going to get together in the end and everything will be fine because love conquers all. Yeah, I don't care. All right, kick his ass. Go for it. but it also gives that extra thing to it. In terms
true.
of like tiny genres, Naruto. The Naruto and Sasuke fighting Zabuza, the very first time, the windmill shuriken. It's a tiny change, but it's gone from, oh yeah, it's ninja battles, blah, 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 to it's ninja battles where incredibly clever solutions are going to be how people win. It's not just going to be like super powers and crazy overblown abilities, but oh, I'm going to throw this and I'm going to throw a decoy, but the decoy is actually a double decoy. And it's because Naruto has the power to make clones, but then make that clone pretend to be something else, and then make that do a third thing. And that's going to let us do this kind of crazy maneuver. It's a tiny change, but it goes from battle manga to
Strategy.
plot twisty strategy battle manga.
Yep.
Do you have any that you want to grab? Because I can keep going for a while.
The one I'm thinking of is like, you see these a lot where you have a regular manga going on, shonen, or there's a bunch of them that do this. But all of a sudden, the story says, okay, we're doing a tournament now. And now the whole thing becomes almost a sports theme, where you have competitors, you have brackets, you have people betting, you have this whole, like, who's going to go off against who, things like that. It's not done as much as it used to be, but tournament arcs in most stories was a big thing, because you have Hunter x Hunter, you have Naruto did it, you have Toriko did it, but as a cooking competition.
Flame of Recca did it. It was a huge part of it.
Yu Yu Hakusho did it. Yeah, there's a ton of stories.
And plenty more.
That do tournament arcs. One Punch Man did it. Food Wars is always
My Hero Academia.
Yep.
Dragon Ball did it like 9 times.
Yeah, but it's one of those, okay, we were having just some kind of story, and then all of a sudden, we're going to just take it in a more sports-like direction for a little bit, and then just go back to where we were, just to kind of mix everything up. It's like, okay, some people really like tournaments. Some people don't for various reasons, but that could be, okay, once it gets to the tournament arc and you see all the characters interacting with each other at the same time, that's when it gets good. Because that was a big thing for Yu Yu Hakusho. Once it gets to the tournament arc, that's when a lot of people say, this is when it took off. Yeah, so it's...
when it crossed that point where it has a structure that sort of pulls it together.
Right.
And not needing to focus so much on like balancing everything. It's like, okay, we're just in this tournament. This is now just the thing now.
Yeah. It's very straightforward. This person goes up against this person, and whoever wins goes up against the next person. So it's very easy to follow, assuming there's not other things going on. So it allows for more character growth, because it's like, okay, I'm going to go train and things like that and be better. So it's a very simple structure, but it allows for a lot of nuance to character interactions and character growth, which can be good.
Yeah, definitely. Another one that this one has flip-flop back and forth for me between expanding narrative and expanding genre. Banished from the Hero's Party. We're going to have to talk about this one more in depth, but the world itself, the actual tragedy of the skill system that everyone in the world lives with, where your skills don't just define what you can do, they interfere with your personality. And it's not something about who you were your whole life. It's something that you get as you grow older. I think it happens like when you're around 11 or 12, you gain your like class skill. And it can be anything from like Dragon Slayer to Hero to Guide to Sage to Mage to Warrior to Bar Fighter to Rebel to Assassin. And it has nothing to do with who you were. And it may have no value to you in your day-to-day life, but you will have this skill, and the skill itself will start pressing in on you and making you act and do things in a certain way that you have no control over and you never had a choice in. The hero and Banished from the Hero's Party, and a lot of the characters in the world, is one of the most tragic characters in it. She can't sleep. She can't feel emotion anymore because she's immune to charm. She's immune to fear. She's immune to fury. She's immune to exhaustion. She's immune to sleep. So she literally just can't sleep. So everyone else goes to bed, and she just sits there in the dark by herself for 8 hours, waiting for everyone to get up.
Yeesh. Yeah.
Something goes wrong, and she's literally can't be upset or happy or concerned or anything. She cannot physically feel feelings anymore. And it's not just that. Like, one of the minor characters is turning 12, and his skill is bar fighter. And it's like, I had an uncle who was it, and he's drunk. Is that going to be me? And that is part of the main story. This tragedy of the universe and this emotional ennui is not something that shows up heavily in any of the books until like 3 or 4, but it sort of gets hinted at in the first one. I feel like it kind of comes into its own in book 2, but it takes a while to get there. And it's when you really get that of, oh crap, you're just going to wake up one day and have this thing, and it's going to be part of you. Deal with it. That changes the way the whole story feels. It's a really fascinating thing. It's probably one of the coolest worlds at just making you feel bad about everything.
Okay.
To make it really quick, the fourth one, the last one, I called it Expanded Experience. It's, I don't know, kind of feels like this, but I can't really decide what it's really about. This is when it gets really good. It's the catch-all term. Yay!
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but this is when it gets cool, so I'm calling it this thing. The only thing that I couldn't really place, and maybe you can, Shangri-La Frontier, the battle with Weathermon.
Yeah, that is
That
good.
is the moment. Up until that point, it's great. It's a lot of fun. But the incredibly long 2 to 3 book battle with a single guy
Yeah, it's really
that
good.
never stops being dramatic and crazy. That's like, if you get to that point and you enjoy it, it's like, okay, you're sold. Shangri-La Frontier, this is what you want to read. And if you get to it and you're like, I don't really like this, good, you're done.
Too much battling.
You don't have to bother. This is not for you. And that's what I think, just to sort of wrap this up, like, critical points aren't a good thing. They're not a bad thing. They're not anything. They're just a concept that I literally made up to try and explain this. But having them in a story doesn't make the story bad.
No.
And not having them in the story doesn't mean it's bad either. It's just like a concentration of excitement or coolness, or just the moment when people who are just sort of reading along, following slowly, it clicks.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
And it's one of those things where many people can point to it. It's like a lot of people will know, like the Weathermon fight will be a click for a lot of people. When major characters show up, it'll be a click for a lot of people. But that doesn't mean everyone's click is the same. Because as you were saying, like maybe everyone says, as soon as Sanji shows up, the dynamics of the crew changed. That's when it really started to take off for me. And that's fine. There's things will click for all people for all different reasons. But they're like major points like, okay, I can point to this and say, I really like the story even more when this happened going forward.
Yeah. And there's lots of great stories that I think don't have them. Dan to Dan, if there is one, it's the first chapter, which is a dumb thing to say anyway. Like, but you get the entirety of the experience of what Dan to Dan is, as far as I've read, which is 11 volumes. It's all there in the first book, and it's all open. It's an incredibly masterful first chapter. And you can't expect that from everything, but it just happened to work out that way, where everything is all there right from the beginning. Another one, Coppersmith Bride. I cannot point to a single moment where it's like, that was when it got really good. Because to me, it's been the same throughout. Yeah. It's always been consistently really good. There's no moment that I can point to and go, oh, that's when it got good.
And that doesn't mean it's bad.
Not at all. Yeah. Not at all. I think it's fantastic. And it's just, we have these stories and these things happen, and we clearly have this collective understanding that sometimes it takes a bit, and then this thing happens, and we're like, yeah, now it's cool. Yeah. But yeah, any final thoughts you have?
No, I think we summed it up pretty well. It is definitely one of those where it's interesting way to explain certain narrative characteristics, and that allows more discussion of all of these stories that we've been reading. What clicks for you may not be what clicks for me, and we can talk about that, and that's what's important. Because the good thing about having different points that click for each other, because if you talk about yours, maybe it's like, oh, I didn't even think about that, and oh yeah, that does make more sense, and didn't even cross my mind when that character showed up that it would lead to that. And that's a good thing, being able to talk about different aspects of a story that are perceived differently for different people.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I think that's interesting and important about them is the opposite, which is there are still points where lots of different people all see the story take off. And that's something that I think is interesting and important for us to think about, because to be like way less than just, hey, stories are cool and this story is really good and this is why we should like it, but just if you want to recommend something to someone, being able to say, get to book 3, chapter 17, get to this scene. If you get to that and you still don't like it, okay, you're good. Like, yeah, this is not for you. Oh, this is a funny romance, or oh, this is an interesting battle series, or hey, this is a really dramatic slice of life story. Like, we can say all of that, but if I can hand you a book series and say, get to this part of the book, because I know these plot points are going to happen, and also this sort of intangible sense that just exists in the story of, here's where the tragedy comes in, here's where the narrative is expanding, here's where you've definitely seen the romance start to bubble up. Here's your point where I know most people who read this are going to get it. Mm-hmm. And I can, as a person trying to recommend something, I love that, because I can say, for some series, it's like if it's really far in there and they're not super interested, I probably won't push it anymore, because it's like, I mean, if you get to book 9, maybe you'll start really liking it. That's a big ask.
But you have to get to book 9, yeah.
But you have to get up to book 9. But if it's like book 2, then I'll just be like, just push through it.
Yeah.
But also, to me, for someone to be able to tell me, like, get to this point, this is when you'll know. You can get past a lot of stories that really struggle to take off.
Yep.
And it's like, this feels like it's going to be something, but I don't know if it's going to get there. And if I can get to that point and someone's like, this is when you know if you really like it, I don't care. I just don't. Then I can be like, this isn't working for me, and I can sort of set it aside. And maybe if I had just kept going, I would really get it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the moment for me. The fascinating thing is, for this kind of comic and narrative, we can have these things exist and talk about them, and people actually agree on them in the internet age. Like, who would have thought that would ever happen again?
Yeah.
But it gives you something that you can grab onto. And this is just me throwing this at the wall and trying to talk about it and trying to piece it together. We're probably going to bring this up and talk about it again when my brain works enough to actually make it into something clearer. But that's why I wanted to talk about this and be like, here's the thing. What do you think? And yeah.
Our review for the week is going to be on Jujutsu Kaisen, the Fearsome Womb arc. It's chapters 1 to 18, the first 2 books plus the first chapter of the 3rd book, if you're following along. For anyone who doesn't know, Jujutsu Kaisen is a Shonen Jump. It's now complete. I think it ended the end of last year. There's 30 volumes total in Japan. So far, they're up to 28 in English. And it's was around for quite a few years. It was very popular. There is an anime. They've had a couple seasons now. I definitely haven't completed it. It's very popular. You've probably seen it around. Just to kind of get everyone up to speed, there's a number of main characters. There's a lot of side characters that get introduced, even in this first arc.
Yep.
So the main ones you want to try to remember are Yuji Itadori. He is the main boy. You see on the covers, he has the pink hair. So his deal is... Oh, I need to back up a little. So the book, the whole story is all about curses. So because of that, Yuji is able to eat a specific cursed item and gain powers because of that. And he is a first-year student in Japan. There's also Megumi Fuchiguro. He is the other main boy. His power is that he can summon creatures to help him fight. He's also first year. And then there's Nobura Kagusaki. Yeah, that's the one. Kagusaki. She's the main girl, makes up the trio. She uses cursed nails and cursed dolls. Not quite cursed dolls, but cursed voodoo dolls.
Yeah, it's not voodoo dolls, but it's the Japanese style of how they had voodoo doll type objects to curse people. It's a very specific thing, but it's like little straw dolls and hammer and nail type nails.
Yep. If you're an American, you think of a voodoo doll. It's very similar looking.
And even not similar looking, it's the same idea of a doll to curse somebody.
And then there's two other main characters. There's Satoru Gojo. He is the epitome of the characters in this story. He is the teacher. He is in possession of the most powerful, if not almost the most powerful skills in the whole series. He is in possession of a skill called the Six Eyes, which lets him see everything, or lets him perceive everything. And then the ultimate technique called Limitless. Pretty much his technique is infinity. So he is able to perceive all and do all. And so he is the most overpowered person to start off a series.
Yeah, he's pretty strong.
He's pretty strong.
Pretty powerful, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's Sakuna. He is the bad guy of yore. He is an ancient demon. He was, at the beginning of the story, they say he's defeated, but you learn more about that later. He is a demon with 4 arms, so thus 20 fingers. And at the beginning of the story is about these 20 fingers have been removed and are now cursed items, where if they are around or you touch them or things like that, they draw in curses or malevolent spirits that will harm or inhabit or do all kinds of gnarly things and mess with people. And these fingers draw them in. So they're typically very secure, hidden away. They're not supposed to be where just anyone can get them. And that's how the beginning of the story is. And then there's a ton of other minor characters that show up to become major characters as the story goes on. But in the beginning, very beginning, it's those 4 and Sakuna are the major characters. So, story-wise, it starts off very like Shonen Jump. You have the 3 heroes, and that's how the story progresses for quite a bit. And then it kind of starts to find its own pace and almost its own genre as time goes on. This is a much darker story as it goes. It's not as happy-go-lucky as, not like Naruto was happy-go-lucky, but this is a much darker view of the world.
Yeah.
Than One Piece or Bleach or Naruto.
God. Compared to One Piece, yeah. And Naruto and Bleach, like it is surprising that it was a Shonen Jump series. It's not super violent, but it is dark. There's a lot of evil, and there's a lot of things that are not necessarily evil in the traditional sense, but will do horrible things to you.
Right.
Where it's sort of like the force of a hurricane isn't evil, but it will rip your arms off. It will tear your body to pieces. And there are creatures / things in this world that are like that. And it does not directly shy away from showing that, yeah, you're probably going to die and it's going to be horrible. When you think of shonen, you think of Naruto, Bleach, One Piece, even My Hero Academia, for some of the darker elements that that's had, like, are bright balls of sunshine, beach party episodes compared to even the very beginning of the series.
And a lot of people consider this, if you're really into Shonen Jump, there's the big 3, which I already talked about, which are Bleach, One Piece, and Naruto. Then a lot of people considered Jujutsu Kaisen to be part of the dark trio, where the main popular stories of Shonen went on the more darker side. And this includes Jujutsu Kaisen, Chainsaw Man, and Hell's Paradise. This is definitely a dark story. So if you're not into dark stories, this probably isn't going to be for you. Kind of rough outline of what goes on in the Fearsome Womb arc. It's very much an intro story. It goes through, it's a lot of how the world works. Because while it does take place in modern day Japan, the curse idea is not something that comes up very often in regular every day. So curses are considered a power, but also, as you were saying, just a force of nature. They just exist because there's people. And the idea of a curse is that the more people think about it and they fear it, the stronger the curse gets. So curses of volcanoes or people are afraid of volcanoes. That makes a curse about volcanoes stronger. Whereas I fear just something. And it's like, it's vague. It's kind of like if someone dies, then they're afraid. That kind of creates a curse. And then curses can grow and, as we know, die. And it's these Jujutsu users go around destroying curses, capturing curses, dealing with the fallout of curses, because they will attack everyday people, not just people who can perceive them. And they'll either make them sick, they will tell them to do bad things, or they will kill them. So these users, they're considered sorcerers, will go around and stop them. And that's who you follow throughout this story.
Yeah, I think a good shorthand to think about it is if you think of the very classical Japanese horror movies like Ring and Grudge, if you just imagine that malevolence as a force that exists there, that's what curses are. That style of Japanese curses, that's what the story is about. And one of the things that I think it does really well is it builds this entire framework and world and power dynamic and structure and abilities just from this idea of fear and hate and negative emotions that people have builds up and creates a force that just exists, and that force can then do things, and that force can't just be cleaned up. It can affect us, but we can't affect it back without using another cursed power, because that's the other thing.
Yep.
You can't just put something,
punch it
or use something sacred to make it go away. You need a different curse to actually physically fight back against a curse. You can escape it, but you can't fight it unless you yourself are also using some kind of curse.
Yeah. So we'll set the scene. As I said, Yuji is the main character. He is the one and all in the first volume. He's right on the cover page. So he is just a regular student at the very beginning. He's extremely athletic. His only family is his grandfather, who's in the hospital. And then at high school, Yuji is very popular, has lots of friends, everyone knows him. And then we see Megumi, who's looking for cursed objects, specifically one of the fingers. And it turns out that one of these fingers is supposed to be at Yuji's school. So because Yuji is just a regular person at the time, he has a friends who are in the occult club, and they find this box of maybe a cursed item. So because they're just a kids club who likes occult things. So it's like, oh, okay, we found this cool item. We're going to hold a seance and things like that. So Megumi finds Yuji because they didn't know each other, but they know that something's wrong. And it turns out that the occult club has opened the box, has messed with the finger, and because they unsealed the finger, that sends a beacon up to all the curses around. It's like, oh, there's something over here that you want to eat, because this thing is overflowing with curse energy. So all these beasts come out, and it's just a free-for-all. Yuji and Megumi are in a fight to try to save the two friends from the occult club. They are attacked. They are injured. Yuji can do almost nothing. He just tries to save everybody because at the time he doesn't have curse energy. He doesn't have curses. He's just a regular person. He's athletic, but that's it. And Megumi is trying to help everyone else, but he's one person. He can summon creatures to help him, but he's still new at this as well. He's not a full-fledged sorcerer. He's very much a first-year student, but was sent here to kind of look for this item. It was just supposed to be in a box. So at the end, the curses have overpowered. They're now about to devour the finger, kill the occult club, and eat. I think they're going to eat Yuji. And he decides, I can't punch it. I can't do anything without curse energy. So he says, I'm going to eat the finger, and that will give me curse energy. So he eats it. And when that happens, that's when the Sukuna, who's the ancient demon, his power awakens in Yuji. It's like, okay, Sukuna is now like, oh, I now have a vessel. Someone has allowed me to possess them. He looks around, destroys the curse immediately. It's like, all right, what's next? I am now free. And that's where the first chapter ends.
Yep.
So it's cool. It's an interesting idea. It feels like there's a lot going on, and there is.
Yeah.
It doesn't have. This was also done a while ago now, so it's a good opening. It's an interesting opening. It's a lot of information, but I think one of the things is that it's not a complete story yet. You have to keep going because it ends on the cliffhanger of Yuji is now no longer Yuji. He is now Sukuna. But the next chapter ends with he's back to Yuji. And you find out later that Gojo was watching over Megumi to see what was going on and finds that, oh, yeah, this wasn't supposed to happen. I'm gonna step in. And it's an interesting narrative because it's okay, now we're going to go back into the past and go show you what actually happened, and then we're going to go back to the present because Yuji's like, I ate a finger and then something happened.
Yeah, I agree on all this. I'll spoil the thing that I've already spoiled 5 or 6 times anyway. Mm-hmm. I'm not a huge fan of Jujutsu Kaisen. I've read some of it, and the more I read, the more I sort of get it. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is good. But it's taken a long time, and a lot of it I'm like, it comes down to the idea of it's fine. It's good. It's not a story that makes me want to jump up and say, oh, you should read this. It's a story that I'm like, yeah, I read it. What do I think? It's fine. Do you think I should read it? Probably not. But the thing that I think that I didn't really realize until recently, I think the beginning is good. It's incomplete. It's like you said, it's this very complicated opening. It starts out with all this stuff. There's all these things going on. There's clearly a lot here, and it's clearly not all put into place. But just that opening itself, I don't think it's great, but I don't see that as the part that makes me just go, it's okay. It's just, it's a lot. And I think even for everyone, you have to put the time in for this series.
Yep.
I think the one thing that the series does do well is that beginning is like, it doesn't hide that from you. It tells you like there's gonna be a lot to this, but hey, there's this cool cursey thing. Yeah. There's these crazy powers. There's a kid who can do crazy. Oh wait, no, he could do that anyway. But anyway, he's here too. Like, I don't think the opening itself was the best that could have been done. It's gonna take work to get into this story. And I don't think the first chapters hide that fact, and that's something I think is really good about them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because as the story goes along, you learn about Gojo and how overpowered he is, and he is a teacher at this school where Megumi goes, where now Yuji, because he ate a finger, is being sent to because he now has curse power, so it's called Jujutsu High School. And you find out that of the first years, there are 3 in this whole school.
Yep.
So Megumi, Yuji, and Nobara. And then we meet Nobara later. She is a typical high school girl. She's actually not from Tokyo. She is from further away. She calls herself from the sticks and things like that. She wants to go be the big city. And as we said before, her curse technique is to nail things, deliver curse energy through the nails, or deliver a curse through the straw doll. And they go along, and we're now learning more about the world of curses that they live in. Mm-hmm. And then we get to a point where we get the darker side. All of a sudden, there's now a in-story in this arc, a sub-story about a juvenile detention center. This detention center, because of all the negative energy and all of the just bad things that happen there, has created a curse that's almost like an egg. And it's going to hatch. And because of that, the 3 new first years, Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara, are sent over to investigate because they don't know what it is yet. It's just there. Because there's multiple levels of kind of curses that deal with different strengths. There's 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and then special. And then depending on how good you are, that determines which grade of curses you can deal with. And then special ones are pretty much left to people of Gojo's level. Mm-hmm. It's like, if it's a special, run away. Run away and pray you don't die.
Yeah.
Because you're not doing nothing unless you're running away.
Mm-hmm.
So this detention center, they go and investigate. They find a number of the students murdered in horrible ways. And it turns out that they found the curse. It's up and walking around. And it's not a egg or a level 1 curse. Is a special grade curse. And they're like, we have to get out of here. Because it's overpowered completely.
Yep.
So Megumi runs because he is able to. Because as soon as Yuji stands to stand his ground, hand lopped off. His whole hand gone.
Yep.
This curse is just messing with me. He is just toying with me. He's beating me up and things like that. And then as he's on his last legs, Sukuna takes over. So, boom, instantly healed. And then it introduces probably the most iconic powers of this whole series, the domain expansion. It's a technique that everyone can use if you have curse power. Well, you have to have enough curse power.
Yep.
And it's pretty much the iconic special power of this whole series is the domain expansion. And the idea is I create a mini universe where I control the rules of how this universe works. And in that, whatever my personality, my powers dictate is what happens. And pretty much I am untouchable here and I can touch you whenever I want.
One thing I want to correct is Megumi runs, but Yuji tells Megumi to run and to take Nobara, because I think she's injured at that point.
Yep.
Basically tells him, you two get out. I'll hold him off as long as I can.
That's true.
Because they all know if they all stay, they will all die. I believe Nobara was already injured, had been hurt already, so that's why it was, Megumi, you take her and get out. I believe the thought was also that once they got outside, they would signal to Yuji and he would let Sukuna take over. And then because they were out and escaped, Sukuna could take over and then wouldn't immediately kill the other two of them.
That's true.
Because they would already be out.
Yeah, because Gojo wasn't there to stop Sukuna if he went berserk.
Yeah, so there was a plan, and there's the other things going on. But to me, this is the moment where it really falls off.
Really?
Yeah. I think the domain expansion, which comes up later, is a neat idea, and I think the start of book 2 is a lot. This is the end of book 1.
Pretty much, yeah.
And the start of book 2. And I think the start of book 2, when you get to the domain expansion and Sukuna does this and the stuff that we're about to talk about after this, that's when it starts getting interesting again. But this whole moment when they go into they're going to the juvenile detention center. Okay, so they're going to solve a problem. Yeah, that's good. And then immediately we get the same thing that we had at the beginning of, we're going to introduce 12 new things that are important to understand how all of this goes on. And we're going to explain none of it, but it's all required reading. And
yes.
We're not even going to explain any of it properly. We're going to leave out half of it intentionally. And it doesn't really matter because we're going to immediately go from 0 to 100.
Yeah, I could see that.
It's just, to say it in the shortest way possible, it feels like the story decided we needed Sukuna to come out, but the story also decided that we needed to send them on this low-stakes mission that seemed important, but was something that they could handle and they could go into. And then the writer decided on those 2 points and then just scribbled a line to get from one to the other. And there was no build-up, there was no intentionality, there was no escalation to it. Mm-hmm. It just went, this is something that's going to be difficult, but that you should be able to handle, to everyone's about to die, run. And there's no sentence in between those 2 thoughts. It's too much of a whiplash if I'm trying to give a narrative to it. And it's not even that there's a whiplash, it just is. They show up and it's like, yeah, there's all these things that explain why this situation could happen, but they're not even really explained deeply enough in the story for you to really wrap your mind around it until book 3, book 4, when they talk about this more and more events have sort of happened. It's just sort of like the author said, well, this happened because reasons that I know and you'll find out later. That's how I see it, and this to me is one of the lowest points. It doesn't work.
I see where you're coming from, because it is a lot of, we have to explain everything right now, but we can't because there's just not enough pages, and it would be a very boring chapter.
Yeah.
So there is that. It's like, okay, there's a lot to take in, and so we have to explain what all the curses are. We have to explain all the different levels. We have to explain what all the different powers are. It's like, okay, we have to explain so much, but we also have to have a story. And if you don't move the story along, people will be like, okay, this is kind of boring.
Yeah, but it also feels like they didn't want to take the time to actually show these characters doing anything.
Yep.
Nobara is an interesting character, and you meet her as a character, and like a person and like sort of get a sense of who they are. And then it feels like this is the adventure where we're going to see what she can do. And you get to see what she can do for a few pages, and then immediately everything is just ignored and we go straight to max difficulty. And it's not that that isn't good, but that wasn't what I think the story needed. It needed a chance to show these characters being someone and not just immediately kicked into the teeth. Because a couple books from now, when Nobara gets to do stuff and you get to see her be, and Megumi gets to do more and you see them, and Yuji gets to do more and you get to see them, their powers, their things they do are interesting. Mm-hmm. It's just like you get to learn what Nobara's powers are in book 3. Yeah. Even though you see your first battle in book 1.
Yeah. I think the thing about this, the beginning of this story, or the beginning of Jujutsu Kaisen in general, it feels a lot like Naruto again. You have the 3 characters, 2 boys, a girl. The 2 boys are the main. Yuji is the happy-go-lucky, I'm super strong person who's now possessed. Yeah. Megumi is not like Sasuke, though. He's not a disgruntled person whose family has been decimated. He has his family's not great, but that's a different issue. He's not trying to do other things. He's very much an understanding person who's trying to help, and is not trying to be the best at anything. He's just trying to help people.
Yep.
And then Nobara is very much almost forgotten sometimes in this part of the story. It's like, okay, she can do cool stuff.
Yes.
But it's very much Yuji's show right now. Yuji and Megumi are the main characters at this moment, and then Gojo has to come in and save everyone again.
The Naruto thing, I think, is a great thing, because I think Naruto, though, does it well. If we go with like Naruto is Yuji and Sasuke is Megumi, or the other way, the boys are the boys, yeah. But Nobara and Sakura are very different.
Yes.
Sakura and Naruto does what she can do in those early stages very well from the beginning. The only thing is she's not a fighter, but she's clever, she can plan, she can do these other things, and those things are shown at least a little bit. And she's shown as not being a capable fighter, but being clever and understanding all the knowledge sections of being a ninja. The problem is Nobara is, you're told she can fight. You're told she can do this. And the first moment she's allowed to fight, it's immediately like, boom, punched right in the back of the skull and knocked out. Sakura gets to be Sakura. Nobara does not get to be Nobara.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what really makes those different. Sakura doesn't fight a lot, but what she can do, she's shown as doing. Like in the Hidden Mist arc, she is guarding the Bridgekeeper, and she's doing a bunch of other things. She's not a great fighter, but she can do some, and she's involved in these different things and is an important character in that part of the story. Nobara is just there, and she's told that you're going to see this thing and this is going to happen, and then it's just, yeah, no, we actually don't care about any of this. We just want Sukuna to come back for a plot point we're about to have.
Yeah.
Speaking of plot point we're about to have, domain expansion, and then the curse is killed. It turns out it ate a finger, and none.
Wow. Yeah. So now, I believe at this point he's eaten 3 fingers? 2 fingers? He's eaten a number of...
I think it's 3.
He eats a lot of fingers. It's kind of weird. But because Sukuna takes over, it's pretty much a complete possession where I can do whatever I want. I am a spirit. So he decides, I'm going to rip out Yuji's heart because I feel like it. I don't need this. So as long as I'm a possession, this is just a useless lump of meat. But if Yuji takes possession, he's dead instantly. No heart. Goodbye.
Yep.
So Sukuna's like, okay, Megumi, what you gonna do? Let's have another rematch. And so they fight, and eventually it's like, Megumi realizes, at the end of the day, I just wanted to save you. And that's when Yuji's like, yeah, you're right. Thanks. Goodbye. And he cancels the possession and just dies.
Yep. It's
an interesting point. It's like, okay, you just theoretically killed off a main character.
Yeah. And
then a few chapters later, you find out he's not dead. But
shocking,
yes, I know.
Yes.
We didn't kill off the first person you see in the book. Is it the first person? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is the very first person
He's the cover art main character.
Yeah.
I like this.
Yeah.
I think this is a good comeback. Where the previous part was all of like, we had to make this thing happen so that Sukuna could come in and do plot point, and there's more plot point to come, but still, okay, this is where you start to see the cleverness of the power system. Like, okay, I'm a spirit, like I don't care about my physical body here. I'm just gonna rip my heart out. Blah. I can't die. All right, now I'm gonna kill the person you were trying to save. What are you gonna do? And it's like, I'm gonna come back and I'm just gonna die. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go, Yuji. That's something.
Yeah. He's like, I will sacrifice just because I don't want people to die because of me. Because Sukuna is pretty much all powerful. Gojo is, for the most part, one of the few people who can go toe to toe with him at this point.
Yeah.
And he wasn't there.
And there's a lot of like backstory with Yuji that we're skipping over, that it makes sense why he would do this. And even though it's kind of just cheating by letting him come back, and it's basically at the point of that dreaded Deus Ex Machina from the thing we talked about with Naruto. This one I don't mind, A, because I don't like it as much, so it doesn't bother me as much. But B, I like the way it's played better. The main character is ready to just like, I'm gonna kill your friend, and the only way you can stop me is to die. And the main character's like, okay, bet. And that's really interesting characterization, and it gives Yuji a lot of what he says and what he believes in and everything that happens in the story. Like, a lot of credence is just, yeah, all right, you ripped my heart. Like, because Yuji's in the story so far has also said like he's gonna eat all the fingers and then like let the other sorcerers kill him, because that's one way they could get rid of Sukuna.
Yeah.
Is he eats as many as he can handle, and then they kill him.
Right.
And that gets rid of those fingers.
Yep.
I think it's a good section of the story, even though I feel like it's coming right after something that's really not that good.
Yeah.
But anyway, continue, good sir.
So everyone believes at this point that Yuji's dead. So Megumi and Nobara go back to school. This is when they introduce the second year students. You have 3 students for the Tokyo Jujutsu High School. You have Panda, who is a giant cursed panda.
Yep.
You find out more about who he actually is later. But for the most part, he's a giant panda. He does talk. He's not just a panda. There's Maki, who is a cursed tool user. She herself cannot use curse energy how Yuji was when he first started. However, she has grown up in this Jujutsu Kaisen world of curses. So she wears special glasses that allow her to see curses and uses tools and weapons that are infused with curses, cursed energy. So she can use a sword, a polearm that has cursed energy in it to defeat curses. So that's what her power is. Not even her power, her techniques are. They're all weapon based. And there's Toge. His power is probably the hardest one to kind of wrap your head around. He is able to curse things with his speech. So the idea is that if he tells you to stop, that is, the word stop is full of curse energy, and it will just make you freeze. You will just stop whatever you're doing. Or he could say die or things like that. So his voice is his curse tool. So because of that, he talks in food, talks in random things, so he doesn't say a word that will cause his power to activate.
I believe, again, because I think I've read this more recently than you, he talks mostly in rice ball fillings.
I believe that's specifically what, it's one of those.
Which is...
How do you understand him?
The talking panda makes more sense than this guy.
Yeah. How can you live your life like this? But yes, he's actually very powerful.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You don't see it for quite some time, but when you do, I have gotten far enough to see his power, and he's... I have problems with this part too, but I will say, like, in time, when you actually see these 3 new characters, like, actually really do stuff, they are all awesome characters, and it's a lot of fun, and, like, again, it comes back to the thing with the last time, where the whole juvenile detention center felt so utterly forced that it was like, we're going to do this thing to show the characters, and by show the characters, we mean force a plot point to happen and not show anything about any of the characters. And then you have this, like, kind of neat idea with Yuji, and then immediately after that it's okay, let's introduce some more characters. And they're not really, they're gonna talk and they're gonna be around and they're not gonna do much, but yeah, here's some more characters. And it's like, I still want to see Nobara. I still want to actually understand Megumi better.
Yeah.
And Yuji's freaking dead.
Yeah. So Nobara and Megumi are quite upset that Yuji's dead. So their Panda, Maki, and Toge are trying to cheer them. I was like, okay, but we'll make you stronger. We'll train because it's better than just thinking about Yuji.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to do that. And because of that, it's like, okay, it's kind of, you see them interact, but it's very, we're just training. We want to make our powers better, but it's like, no one's going on missions. You're not seeing them deal with other curses. Okay. And then you find out that Yuji isn't dead. So
I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it actually is good. It's the story not just being like, let's do battles, let's do crazy, silly things. It's let's have these characters be people and interact and process this stuff and deal with it. Like, if you're gonna have these heavy topics, you want to actually wrestle with them and talk about them, and that's all good, but it feels like we've now just decided to become something different, where it's like a superhero show, but it only takes place in an Alcoholic Anonymous room. Like with a bunch of folding chairs. It doesn't take place during an Alcoholic Anonymous meeting, ever. That never comes up. It's just them in that kind of a room. Like, that's kind of where it feels like here. It's like, okay, we've got all this crazy stuff, and we're going to talk about our feelings. Granted, it's great. I think it's good, but it again, it just feels like something's, to me, it just really feels like something is off here. Something's just missing. And I can look back on it now. I like these characters and I like that they did this, but in the moment when I'm reading it for the first time, I just don't get it. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? What is this for? Okay, yes, this is dramatic and fun and interesting, but what? I don't understand. It feels like it's that you need to put the work in to understand and explain everything, but it's not explained to you for a long time. And even when it is, it takes a lot of mental effort to process it and understand it. And a lot of that foundation work has started to show up, but a lot of what you need doesn't come up until later still.
Mm-hmm.
And that just rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. It feels like there's so much going on at once that there's not a lot of focus. And because of there's the story of the students, there's the story of Yuji, there's the story of Gojo going on. We have to focus on one of them, but we can't. And because of that, like, Gojo's doing his own thing, Yuji's doing his own thing, all the students are doing their own thing.
Yep.
And then it turns out there's other curses doing their own thing that you get that are hinted at. And they're out there trying to bring Sukuna back. So now there's a subplot of, okay, there's so many things going on. And then, okay, well, now there's Kyoto. They're sending over people. They're going to rough the Tokyo people up to figure out what's going on over there, because there's a second school as a rival.
Yep.
And it's like, there's a lot of plots that are introduced in this first arc. Mm-hmm. And a lot of characters. And it's a lot to take in. And as you were saying, it feels like there should have been more time devoted to this.
Yeah.
It should have been a few more, either it should have been a shorter arc that focused on a few characters, or a longer arc that focused on all the characters we currently have. So you could flesh out all this story a little better, to have it flow and make a bit easier to digest all at once, and kind of give characters a longer time to shine and show off who they really are, not just, yeah, there's that person. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we see that, but they're just kind of interacting with each other. They're not really interacting with the world. And yeah.
That is it. That is the thing. To me, when I look at these characters, every single one of them, like, this is a cool character. This is a cool idea. I like this character. And it's not just a good idea. I like the way they're presented. I like how they act. I feel like I understand them. I feel like I enjoy watching them. But the plot is just not there. It's as if I'm watching a movie, all of my favorite actors and actresses playing these amazing characters, and the script is I'll show up and do stuff. The characters are here and they're cool and they're interesting. But what the characters are here in service of, to me, just is not there.
Mm.
And then a plot point will come up and this particular one will suddenly make sense and be like, okay, now I get it. Sukuna is trying to do this. This is what's going to happen from it. Okay, the primal curses have shown up. This is what they're trying to do. Okay, the second year students have shown up and this is what they're trying to do. And we'll see these characters interact for this reason. And it's like, okay, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, okay, this part's good. Okay, but the connections between them feel so forced and crammed together. Like you said, it either needed to be cut into a smaller piece and stretched out to be one thing, or this whole arc needed to be longer, which again would do the same thing of it would just spread all these moments out and let the plot start moving between each of these points instead of jumping from each to the next to the next.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, it's not like I dislike Jujutsu Kaisen. It's one of those, this probably wasn't the part where I was like, yeah, I'm going to keep reading this one. It's like, okay, I'm reading it as it's going along. But then in the first arc is not what really hooked me. That comes later. But it still has some really good characters, some really good ideas. Definitely get flushed out later. Mm-hmm. But it's one of those, it's not quite amazing yet.
Yeah.
It's good, but it feels like it could have been better.
I agree now.
Okay.
But, so this gets us into the third book. I think by the end of the third book, because I bought the first one, because like, oh, it was on sale, I'll get it, I'll just check it out. Read the first one, had no interest in reading anymore. For a couple of different things, I decided to get a few more volumes of it and just read it. Whether or not I liked it, just to be like, I know people like it, I'm gonna push myself and go further into it. I think by the end of book 3 would have been the first time I got to the end and be like, I'd like to know what happens next.
Yeah.
But this whole first arc, it just never grabbed me. And if for any reason I didn't decide not to buy book 2, I would still have no problem not reading it. Now that I've gotten to book 6, it gets somewhere and I get it. And I don't think it's bad. And I think if you can get past that beginning, if you read that beginning and you enjoy part of it, it does get better. And if you read that beginning and you're not sure, it's probably worth continuing because it does get really good. But it's a really hard sell to me to get someone to go on. This really doesn't grab me in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. At the same time, all these things that I don't like about it, it never does something to me that I'm like, oh, I hate this, or oh, this really bothers me. It's just kind of like, eh. And again, book 3 starts really picking up. Book 4, book 5, book 6, where I've gotten to at this point, I'm actually interested. I'm actually enjoying it. And the characters who have always been good get better and get more interesting. So for something that I know I've said and I still think is really not that good, I'm probably going to keep reading this series at some point. Not at the top of my list, but if you were going to ask me, do I ever intend to finish? The answer is yeah, absolutely. I want to know what happens. But this part just is, to me, just never grabs me at all. And it kind of makes me feel a little better that I'm not the only one. Even you think that for some parts of it.
Yeah, it's just a lot of explaining the world in the first arc. And I think that's needed, but it's also hurting the flow of the story. Because we're trying to explain the world and it's complicated.
Yeah.
But we're trying to do too much at once in too little time. And that hurts the beginning of the story. But it does get better. I agree with you that as time goes on, this becomes a much better paced, better explained, better just in general.
Yeah. And I think this arc, at least from what I've seen so far, this is absolutely the lowest point of everything I've seen. Mm-hmm. Which is not so bad. Like the next arc, it's weird.
Oh, yeah.
And the one after that is the high school, not a tournament arc, because it's really just one big battle kind of a thing that, as far as I know, gets interrupted, but I don't really know because where I stopped ends in the middle of it, but
Ah.
the next 2 or 3 arcs is like, okay, none of them have this forced feeling. The flow is so much more natural.
Yep.
From then on, and they're still explaining things and they're still introducing things, but they're not forcing the plot to occur. They're letting the plot occur, and it's now like, okay, yeah, I get it. I can see where we're going. Sure.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I recommend it. Stick with it. If you like the first arc, it does improve.
Oh yeah, if you like the first arc, it's only gonna get better.
If you're not sure, give the next arc a try. See if you like that better. It is a very different story from the first one.
Yep.
Definitely check it out if you haven't. It's really good.
Thank you for walking us through that.
Yeah.
And with that is going to be today's episode. So thank you once again for listening to us. If you'd like to follow us, you can find us on Blue Sky at Mudai Manga Book Club. You can also find us on YouTube at Mudai Manga Book Club, or on Podbean at Mudai Manga Book Club, whether you're listening on the audio and want to find us on YouTube, or you're listening on YouTube and you want to find the audio only program. You'll find us through all of those names. You can follow us, send us comments, questions. If you want to email us, you can also reach us at mudaimangabookclub@gmail.com. If you are listening on YouTube, please do us a favor and give us a like, subscribe, all those sort of YouTube pleasantries. That's very much appreciated. Just gives us a sense that people are out there, they're listening, they're enjoying the stuff that we're putting out, which is always nice for us to find out. If you do that, thank you very much for doing so. If you are listening on audio and you want to leave a review, again, same thing. We would love it. Gives us a better sense that people are enjoying the stuff that we're putting together. And with that, Louis, do you have any final recommendations for today?
If you've ever played Stardew Valley, the video game, and want more Stardew Valley, check out Stardew Valley, the board game. It's actually pretty good. It scales with the number of people you play as. You play through 1 year trying to get grandpas for quests, fill the community center. It's fun. It takes a little while. It can be long, just depending on how much work you do. It's a cooperative game where you try to do all these together. It's fun. So if you like Stardew Valley, check out Stardew Valley board game. It's the same art, so it looks cute.
Nice.
It has that kind of feel, and yeah, check it out.
Okay. As for me, I'm going to keep it pretty short, but it's going to call back to at least one thing we've already talked about and something we'll talk about. I want to recommend the new album by the Japanese hip-hop duo Creepy Nuts, which is the album Legion. If you've watched the anime for Dandadan, if you've watched the anime for Mashley, the opening songs for each of those is both done by this duo, Creepy Nuts. They'd already been released as singles. This is the album where those 2 tracks appear, and there's a bunch of other songs like that. Creepy Nuts is good at having variety in their music. I've only really listened to 2 of their albums so far, but one of them being Legion. But they don't tend to do the same song over and over again. Even if you can't understand Japanese, the way they perform, the way their music sounds, the way they're rapping, the way that they're singing, and all of that, the tracks are all feel different. So it's a really good set of music. And again, opening for Dandadan, really fucking good. The opening for Mashley, I don't know if you know this, it's really fucking good.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the album that has those 2 songs on it, plus a bunch of other ones that are all really fucking good. So definitely worth checking out if you're interested in Japanese music, Japanese hip-hop especially. And with that, next week we will be covering Hard-Boiled Cop and Dolphin, Volumes 1 and 2, and possibly part of 3, because that's halfway through the series, because it's a short series. Doing 5 books in one, I think, is maybe too much.
That's probably too much.
Yeah. But other than that, that's going to be it for today. Thank you all very much for listening, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye-bye.
Peace.
I am untouchable here, and I can touch you whenever I want. didn't sound quite right.
Yeah. It's finger licking good.
It is finger delicious good. Yeah.
How many finglongers does he eat?
Too many finglongers.
I'm honestly just glad that I won't have to sit and reread Nagatoro 1 through 3 again for the first time in a month. Like, okay, wait, is it this chapter? Like, what is it? What is the thing that makes this